Got my cologne. You know how that works. Just, I'm feeling good that night.
I spoon between these two Australian men who know each other.
She took it, and she looked at me, and she went in to give me a kiss, and I fucking bolted. I panicked. I don't know what the hell to do with that.
And like Leah pushing me against the brick pillar and going, "Who is it? Who's your girlfriend?" And I was like, "It's you, okay?"
Imagine if Scarface wasn't about a drug dealer, but it was about a surgeon. That was my dad, right? He'd be like, "Say hello to my little friend." Scalpel.
Night gowns. What do you call those? Whatever they are. Evening gowns, thank you. And they are gorgeous. And I am a super friendly guy.
And like, I barely like my tongue in my own mouth. Why do I want to put it in somebody else's mouth?
Sometimes they have a partner and the partner comes in and chops their head off. And that's what this breakup was like.
Hey, so very often at StorySlam we get compared to like a stand-up open mic night for stand-up comedy and things like that. And I'm okay with the comparison because very often, one of the things I say all the time up here is that stories beget stories. So on a typical StorySlam night, it is an open mic night where people come and sign up and tell stories. This is not the typical thing where I have chosen specific people. And typically we'll have at least, we'll have between 5 and 7 people that have either pre-signed up or they signed up when they got here. And then we have this room till 10, and so it's like, well, if only 5 people tell a story, we're like kind of screwed here. And so what I always encourage people to sign up, like, hey, think of something. And then, we usually have a theme, and I always say, it doesn't have to be on theme. If you've got a great story, we want to hear it. That's why we're here. And then I encourage them to drink because that also encourages people to tell stories. But the biggest thing that I think encourages people to tell stories is hearing other stories. I compare this a lot to like having a dinner with family that you haven't seen in a long time, and you're sitting around the table and sharing stories. Usually those stories tend to be funny with your family, and then you're reminded, once Uncle Greg tells a story, you're like, oh, I got a story that kind of is in a similar vein, so I can tell it now. So very often at StorySlam, we slant towards the funnier side. Lean towards the funnier side? Whatever. But that's, don't get me wrong, I love the stories, I love the funny stories, and I'm okay being compared to an open mic night for a stand-up comedy show. But that is not what we are. And part of what I love about this is those moments where we get serious stories. Graham just came up here and really, I say this a lot too, ripped open his chest and showed his heart and said, tell me I'm not alone. And those are the moments that prepare us to build community. Because the way that we build community through storytelling, it starts with somebody telling the story and getting up here and drawing a line of connection with each and every single one of you individually in the audience. It's not just a connection with an audience as a sea of people, it's individual. And so somebody gets up here and tells their story, connects with you, and then during the breaks, when somebody comes up to that storyteller and says, hey man, that story really touched me because I went through this thing, and your story let me know that I'm not alone, and that blah, blah, blah. Those conversations, those are the building blocks of community. And they just keep stacking up. That's why we take so many breaks, because we want to build community. So I love the serious stories because that's where the community is for me. Laughing is great together. I love laughing with you guys as a community, but these serious stories are a treat. Hey, what kind of story do you think is next? Our next storyteller is a stand-up comedian in town, and you can often find him at the Comedy Club on States. I believe right now he's in the Madison's Funniest Comic Competition. He just got eliminated from the Madison's Funniest. What a great intro, Adam. Probably should have texted him before I got on stage. But oh well, he produces great comedy shows and live storytelling shows as well. He produces a great show called Tragedy Plus Time Equals Comedy, where comedians get up, tell a tragic story from their past, and then have to get up in the second half and make jokes about that tragic story. I don't know when the next one is, but if you ever do find that on Facebook or see that event, you should go because it's a great event. His next event is actually on Saturday, February 29th. It is a one-man show. He has told me many times that he has used opportunities like Madison Storyslam and The Moth and things like that. He's been featured on the Risk podcast a couple of times. He's used those opportunities to kind of prepare for this one-man show. And the one-man show is called Cautionary Tales, a Traumatic Comedy by Tyson Purcell. And that is happening at, I don't see an address, the Mode Theater in Waterloo, Wisconsin. So you should go see him on Saturday, February 29th. Hey, you're good, because if that had been a Story Slam night, I'd been like, fuck you, I'm not promoting your shit. So go see him in Waterloo. It's not that far. Hey, our next storyteller is Tyson Purcell. He's wonderful. He's telling a great story called The Path.
Thank you, Adam. All right, so it's January 5th, 2009, and I get to meet my daughter for the first time. She was born. She comes out, and she's just screaming. And I look at her, and I'm like, holy shit. And, like, those are the first things that she hears are, like, my laughter and swearing. Because, like, and I'm laughing at it because she's just losing it. And, like, how often in your life do you get to see someone just lose their shit? Like, she's like, it's cold. I mean, like, it's just, oh, man, it really got me because, it's not often you get to see somebody just, here's all my emotion, But, when a child is born, what happens is like, you look at it and you're like, oh, look, she's got her mom's chin. Or my mother-in-law at the time, she's like, oh, she looks like Bob. And I was like, why would you curse her with that? Like, that's my dad. I was like, and she had my blue eyes, which I was pretty happy about. It's easily my best feature because I was like, yeah, all right, she's got something like me. And like, when you're thinking about those things and you're bestowing those like statements on your child, like, oh, she's got this, it's always the best things. Those things that remind you of like the good details from the people that you love or the child's foremothers. So let's fast forward 11 years. It's January 2020, not that long ago. And my daughter looks up at me with her blue eyes, and she's just like, it felt like I was falling and that I couldn't say anything and that no one loved me. I was like, oh. You got your dad's emotions. But it was a moment of crisis, and I'm pretty good in a crisis. So I was like, okay. So I sat down with her, and we talked it out, and we worked it out. And I said, all right, well, when was the last time you felt good? She said, well, it was at lunchtime, and we put it together. And it's like one little instance of like her friends not saving her a seat made her feel devalued and sent her into a spiral. I was like, I know what that's like. I can help you with this. And we worked through it. And at the end of the next half-hour conversation, she came out, she was smiling, and her day was back to being good again. We went and got dinner, and then we put her to bed, and the next morning I took her to school. I dropped her off at school, and we have this ritual where she gets out of the car, and I look at her, and I say, kill it today. And she looks at me, and she says, Aut vincam aut perium, which is the Purcell family motto, which translates to either conquer or perish, which should kind of tell you some of the stubbornness of my forefathers, because it's just like, we're going to have our way, and if we don't, well, we're just going to die. So like, well, like, she said it, and I was like, yes, and I took one look at her blue eyes, and she She smiled and she shut the door and she drove away, and I was like, oh, Vinkum Aut Perium, and I made it 1 block and I started to turn to drive away, and that's when I started to spiral, because I was like, yeah, she probably wouldn't have had that bad day had it not been for me. Why do I have to pass on that? Why do I have to pass on the depression and the ADHD? Why do I have to fucking curse my child with this? And the spiral just starts and it feeds on itself, and I'm losing it. And I know in those moments that I'm not just supposed to isolate myself, so I text some friends, and I'm like, and you can see in the text message, if you look at the change, you can watch me lose it. So it goes from I'm having a bad day to I'm going to quit comedy to I'm going to isolate myself from all my friends. No one loves me. There's nothing good about my life. In like 15 minutes, I can get there. And they're texting me back trying to help me, and then Will says, you just went into the woods ahead of her, man. I was like, okay. I'm starting to think about them. Like, I know that that's the way I'm supposed to feel like it. Like, me having like depression and ADHD will help me help her. But it still doesn't make me feel that much better, because I'm just like, well, had I not had it, she might not have had it. And when I said might, something kind of clicked, and I was like, wait a second. She might not have gotten it, but she also might have. And if I didn't have this, how would I be able to relate? If you're a parent and you love your child and you were watching them go through something intense, there are these moments where you're just like, if you don't have a frame of reference, it's maddening. You pull out your hair, you just, I don't know how to help. But when you do know how to help, you're like, you're ready for it. And it was at that moment I started thinking, I'm like, what would I give to be able to empathize with my daughter? I'd give up a life without depression. I'd give up a life without ADHD. I'd give up a life without all of these other crappy fucking details. Because without that stuff, I wouldn't have been ready to like help her in that moment. And that moment is more important than the 42 years that I've had that have been kind of not that great. Because like when you have depression and these things, it does seem a lot of times like you're walking through the woods and there's brambles and you don't even know if there's a path that you're on. But you're just trying to like kick the shit aside and hack your way through. And you begin to ask yourself, why am I here? But if you just take a moment and turn around and look, you'll see that you left a path behind you that's easier for someone else to travel. So she's going to be on that path, and hopefully she'll widen it. And maybe someone after her will put down some bricks, and eventually that path won't be that hard to travel. So when we think about like how things grow and that sort of stuff, like it's been 5 years, Adam. We're proud of you. I appreciate that you left a path for us to come walk on, because being able to tell these stories, it does help me, and I hope it helps you. Thanks.
Thank you, Tyson. Go see Tyson on Saturday, February 29th at the Mode Theater in Waterloo. It's not that far, people. Support things like this. It's important. This is important.